May 17, 1943, 0430 hours, North Atlantic, 400 miles southeast of Iceland. The rolling deck of the destroyer escort USS Buckley tilted 30 degrees as another wave crashed across her bow. In the cramped galley below decks, Seaman First Class James Robert Mackenzie gripped the counter to keep from falling, his other hand steadying a pot of coffee that threatened to spill across the stove. Above him, on the bridge, the general quarters alarm began its insistent wail. Mackenzie had exactly 45 seconds to secure the galley and reach his battle station. The problem was, nobody had ever told him where his battle station actually was. He was the ship's assistant cook. His job was feeding 300 men 3 meals daily. Combat wasn't in his job description. "Move your ass, Cookie!" a sailor named Henderson shouted as he raced past toward his gun mount. "Germans are here!" Mackenzie secured the coffee pot, shut down the stove, and followed the stream of men heading topside. He emerged onto the main deck into chaos. Searchlights swept the dark ocean. The ship's 3-inch .50 caliber gun was already firing, the muzzle flash turning night into strobing day. Officers shouted orders. Men ran to battle stations with practiced efficiency. Everyone knew exactly what to do except the 19-year-old cook from Nebraska, who'd never fired a weapon in anger. What none of them knew, what Mackenzie himself didn't know, was that before the sun rose this May morning, he would sink 3 German U-boats through a combination of luck, improvisation, and skills learned in the unlikeliest place imaginable, his mother's kitchen in Omaha. The journey to this moment had begun 9 months earlier in the cramped apartment where James Mackenzie lived with his mother, 2 sisters, and invalid father. September 1942 brought another rejection letter from the draft board. Physical examination revealed that James had flat feet, mild asthma, and vision that required thick glasses. Classification 4F, unfit for military service. James crumpled the letter and threw it across the room. His father, paralyzed from the waist down after a factory accident, watched silently from his wheelchair. His mother, working double shifts at the munitions plant, wouldn't be home for hours. His sisters, 12 and 14, did their homework at the kitchen table. "I'm going," James said quietly. "I don't care what the doctors say. Everyone else is fighting. I'm not sitting this out." His father's voice was weak but firm. "Son, there's no shame in staying home. You're keeping this family fed." James was indeed keeping them fed. His father's disability pension barely covered rent. His mother's wages paid for medicine and basics. James worked at the Omaha stockyards, turning cattle into steaks, and brought home leftover meat that management pretended not to notice. Without his contribution, the family would face real hunger. But shame has its own arithmetic. Every morning James watched men his age board trains heading to boot camp. Every evening he read casualty lists in the newspaper. Every Sunday at church, Gold Star mothers received recognition for sons who died in combat. James Robert Mackenzie was 19 years old and healthy enough to work 12-hour shifts butchering cattle. He couldn't explain to his friends why he wasn't in uniform. The rejection letters were private. Public perception was simple. He was a coward. On October 3, 1942, James tried again. Different recruiting station, different doctors. This time he memorized the eye chart before examination. He took asthma medication before the physical. He wore boots with special insoles that disguised his flat feet. The Navy recruiter, a grizzled chief petty officer named Sullivan, studied James with knowing eyes. "You got rejected before, didn't you?" "No, Chief. First time applying." Sullivan tapped the medical file. "Says here you work at the stockyards. Butcher?" "Yes, Chief. 5 years experience." Sullivan's expression changed. "Can you cook?" The question surprised James. "I cook for my family. Nothing fancy, but yes." Navy needs cooks more than it needs gunners. Most boys your age can shoot. Not many can feed 300 men 3 times a day without poisoning them. You interested? James hadn't considered this. He'd imagined himself manning anti-aircraft guns or firing torpedoes. Heroes didn't work in kitchens, but heroes got to serve. Pride could wait. Yes, Chief, I'm interested. Sullivan nodded slowly. Tell you what, your eyes are bad, your feet are flat, and you wheeze when you breathe heavy. But the Navy needs cooks, so I'm going to pass you. Don't make me regret it. T. James Robert Mackenzie enlisted in the United States Navy on October 5, 1942, with the rating of seaman recruit, destined for training as a ship's cook. His mother cried. His father shook his hand. His sisters made him promise to write every week. He left Omaha on October 10th, aboard a train packed with recruits heading to Naval Station Great Lakes for basic training. Boot camp revealed that cooking for the Navy bore little resemblance to cooking for a family. James learned to prepare industrial quantities of food using institutional equipment. Breakfast for 300 men required 75 dozen eggs, 60 loaves of bread, and 30 gallons of coffee. Everything operated on massive scale. But the skills James brought from the stockyards translated perfectly. Butchering cattle had taught him knife work, portion control, and food safety. He could break down a side of beef faster than the career Navy cooks teaching his class. He understood temperatures, cooking times, and how to feed large groups efficiently. More importantly, James possessed something most military cooks lacked. He actually cared whether the food tasted good. Most Navy cooks viewed their job as punishment. James viewed it as craft. He seasoned properly, controlled temperatures carefully, and refused to serve meals he wouldn't eat himself. His instructors noticed. Chief Cook Thomas Brennan pulled James aside after a particularly good meal. "Mackenzie, you got talent. Most kids your age can't boil water without burning it. Where'd you learn?" "My mother, Chief. She worked 2 jobs. I did most of the cooking for my family." Brennan nodded. Good cooks are hard to find. Bad cooks cause mutinies. You keep cooking like this, you'll go far in the Navy. James graduated from cook school on January 15, 1943, and received orders to the destroyer escort USS Buckley, currently under construction at the Bethlehem Steel Shipyard in Hingham, Massachusetts. The Buckley was one of the new destroyer escorts being mass-produced to counter the U-boat threat in the Atlantic. Smaller and slower than fleet destroyers, but cheaper and faster to build. They were America's answer to German submarines that were sinking merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. James reported aboard on February 20th. The Buckley was still being fitted out, her systems incomplete, her crew learning the ship as it took shape around them. The galley was a cramped space below decks, with barely enough room for 2 cooks to work simultaneously. The ship's chief cook, a veteran named Kowalski, who'd served on battleships before the war, looked James up and down with evident disappointment. "You're the assistant they sent me? How old are you?" 19, Chief. "Jesus Christ, I asked for an experienced cook and they send me a teenager." Kowalski sighed. "You ever feed 300 men before?" "Not at sea, Chief. But I graduated top of my class at cook school." "Cook school." Kowalski made it sound like an insult. "This ain't a classroom, kid. At sea, the galley's your battle station. When we go to general quarters, you keep cooking. Men gotta eat whether Germans are shooting at us or not. Can you handle that?" "Yes, Chief." "We'll see. First rule. Coffee's always hot. I don't care if we're in a hurricane or under depth charge attack. Coffee is always hot. Got it?" "Yes, Chief." Second rule. You serve what I tell you to serve, how I tell you to serve it. No creativity, no improvisation. Navy food is standardized for a reason. This rule bothered James. Standardized meant bland. Bland meant men would hate eating. But he nodded. "Yes, Chief." Orders. The Buckley completed sea trials and commissioning on April 30th, 1943. Her first war patrol would take her across the North Atlantic on convoy escort duty. 100 merchant ships loaded with food, ammunition, and equipment sailing from New York to Liverpool. The Buckley and 5 other destroyer escorts would protect them from U-boat wolf packs. Before departure, the crew received their final briefing. Lieutenant Commander Brent Abel, the Buckley's commanding officer, addressed the assembled men on the main deck. "Gentlemen, our mission is simple. Keep the convoy safe. German U-boats will try to sink those merchants. We will stop them. Questions?" A gunner's mate named Henderson raised his hand. "Sir, what if we encounter U-boats on the surface?" Abel smiled grimly. "Then we ram them. These destroyer escorts might be small, but they're faster than any submarine. If we catch a U-boat on the surface, we'll put our bow right through their hull." The crew laughed nervously. The idea of ramming a submarine seemed insane, but Abel was serious. The destroyer escorts had reinforced bows specifically designed for ramming. As the meeting broke up, James heard Henderson talking to his friends. "Ramming U-boats. That's assuming Cookie here doesn't poison us first. Anyone see what he served for breakfast? I think the eggs were still alive." The group laughed. James kept walking. He'd heard worse. Being the youngest crew member and working in the galley made him an easy target. The combat sailors, men who manned guns and torpedoes, viewed cooks as necessary nuisances. Anyone could cook. Real men fought. James didn't argue. He just kept his head down and did his job. The truth was, he agreed with them. He hadn't joined the Navy to cook. He'd joined to fight. But the Navy had other plans. The convoy departed New York on May 8, 1943. 116 merchant ships arranged in columns, stretching across 12 miles of ocean. The Buckley took position on the convoy's southern flank, patrolling back and forth like a sheepdog guarding its flock. For the first 3 days, the crossing was routine. James fell into the rhythm of naval cooking. Wake at 0300 hours. Start coffee. Begin breakfast preparation. Serve breakfast from 0530 to 0700. Clean up. Start lunch preparation. The cycle repeated 18 hours daily. Chief Kowalski maintained constant criticism. The eggs were overcooked. The bacon was undercooked. The coffee was too weak. The bread was stale. James endured it silently, making mental notes of how to improve. On the 4th day, Kowalski caught the flu. By evening, he was too sick to stand. The ship's doctor confined him to bed rest. James was now the Buckley's acting chief cook. For the first time since coming aboard, James could cook his way. That night's dinner featured pot roast with proper seasoning, mashed potatoes with real butter, and gravy that didn't taste like paste. The crew noticed immediately. Henderson stopped James in the passageway. "Cookie, what'd you do different tonight?" Food actually tasted good. "Just cooked it proper, Junte." James said, "Well, keep Kowalski sick a few more days. That was the best meal we've had since commissioning." The compliment felt good. James resolved to maintain the higher standard. If cooking was his contribution to the war effort, he'd cook better than anyone expected. May 16th brought the first U-boat contact. At 1400 hours, the convoy's Commodore signaled all escorts. Submarine reported ahead. Execute Wolfpack Defense Pattern Delta. The Buckley surged forward at maximum speed, joining 4 other destroyer escorts in an extended screening line ahead of the convoy. Sonar operators hunched over their equipment, listening for the characteristic ping that indicated submarine contact. James was preparing dinner when general quarters sounded. He secured the galley and headed topside, still unsure where he was supposed to go during combat. Most sailors had assigned battle stations, gun mounts, engine rooms, damage control parties, but cooks. The regulations were vague. He found Lieutenant Morrison, the Buckley's executive officer, on the main deck. "Sir, where's my battle station?" Morrison looked surprised that James was even asking. "You're a cook? Your battle station is the galley. Men need to eat regardless of what's happening." "But, sir, shouldn't I be doing something to help fight?" "You are helping. You're feeding the men who fight. Now get below and make sure dinner's ready on time." James returned to the galley, frustrated. Outside, he could hear depth charges exploding as the destroyer escorts attacked a suspected submarine contact. He was stuck below decks, frying chicken. The attack continued for 2 hours. When it ended, the sonar contact had disappeared, probably destroyed, possibly escaped. No one knew for certain. The convoy continued eastward. That night, Henderson found James in the galley. "Hey, Cookie, heard you wanted to man a gun during the attack." "I want to contribute," James said defensively. "You are contributing. That chicken tonight was outstanding, way better than Kowalski's cooking. You keep feeding us this good, you're doing more for morale than any gunner." It wasn't the recognition James wanted, but it was something. He thanked Henderson and continued cleaning. If you're enjoying this incredible story of an unlikely hero, hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss how this 19-year-old cook becomes a legend. You won't believe what happens next. May 17th began normally. James woke at 0300 hours, started coffee, and began preparing breakfast. The Atlantic was rough, the ship rolling heavily. Cooking in these conditions required bracing yourself constantly. Hot oil and boiling water became dangerous weapons when the deck tilted without warning. At 0400 hours, as James pulled biscuits from the oven, the general quarters alarm sounded. He secured the galley and headed topside. The night was pitch black, clouds obscuring moon and stars. Searchlights swept the water. The 3-inch 50 gun was already engaging a target James couldn't see. Lieutenant Morrison spotted him. "Mackenzie, what are you doing up here?" "General quarters, sir. I secured the galley." "Get back down there. When this is over, men will need breakfast. You can't cook if you're on deck." James started to protest, but Morrison had already moved on, shouting orders to damage control teams. James headed back toward the galley hatch. Then he saw it. On the ocean surface, perhaps 600 yards off the starboard bow, a long, dark shape broke the water. A conning tower. A U-boat had surfaced, probably trying to radio other submarines about the convoy's position. The Buckley's forward gun fired, the shell exploding short of the target. The U-boat began to crash dive, desperate to reach the safety of deep water before American guns found their range. James watched the conning tower disappear beneath the waves. The submarine was diving right toward the convoy. Once submerged, it would be almost impossible to track. It would torpedo a merchant ship, maybe 2 or 3, before the destroyer escorts could respond. Then James noticed something the watch officers apparently hadn't, a trail of oil on the water's surface, illuminated by the searchlights. The U-boat was leaking, probably damaged by the earlier depth charge attack, and that oil slick led directly to where the submarine had dived. James ran to the nearest ship's phone. "Bridge, this is Mackenzie in the galley. The U-boat is leaking oil. You can track it by the slick on the surface." The voice that answered wasn't impressed. "Get off this line, Cookie. This is for combat communications." "But, sir, there's an oil trail. You can follow it to—" "I said, get off this line." The phone went dead. James stood there frustrated. He'd seen something important, but he was just a cook. Nobody would listen. Then he had another thought. If he couldn't tell the officers, maybe he could do something himself. The Buckley carried depth charges mounted in racks on the stern. James had watched the depth charge crews during drills. The charges were set to detonate at specific depths, adjusted by a dial on the charge's side. Simple as cooking. Follow the procedure, get the desired result. This was absolutely insane. Cooks didn't set depth charges. James wasn't trained for this. He could be court-martialed, or killed, or both. But that U-boat was going to sink American ships unless someone stopped it. James ran aft toward the depth charge racks. The area was unmanned. All available crew were forward, manning guns or damage control stations. The depth charges sat ready in their racks, waiting for deployment. James studied the mechanism. A hydrostatic detonator activated by water pressure. Set the desired depth on the dial, roll the charge off the rack, wait for it to sink, and explode. He'd watched this done a dozen times. The oil slick was still visible, a shimmering trail on the dark water leading away from the ship. The U-boat was perhaps 400 yards aft now, diving fast. James guessed it was at periscope depth, maybe 60 feet down. He grabbed a depth charge, wrestled it to the rack's edge, and set the detonator for 60 feet. The charge weighed over 200 pounds. James could barely move it. But adrenaline gave him strength he didn't know he possessed. He rolled the charge off the rack. It hit the water with a tremendous splash and disappeared. James watched the oil slick, counting seconds. At 60 feet, the charge would need approximately 15 seconds to reach detonation depth. Nothing happened. James felt stupid. He'd probably said it wrong, or the U-boat was deeper than he thought, or this whole idea was the ocean erupted. A column of water rose 50 feet into the air. The explosion's concussion traveled through the ship's hull, a deep boom that James felt in his chest. Debris began surfacing, wood fragments, oil, something that might have been clothing. Then, impossibly, the U-boat itself broke the surface, blown upward by the explosion's force. It hung there for a moment, stern first, water pouring from its damaged hull. Then it slid backward beneath the waves and was gone. James stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. He'd sunk a U-boat with one depth charge by himself. "What the hell did you just do?" Lieutenant Morrison appeared from the darkness, staring at James with an expression between fury and amazement. "The U-boat was leaking oil, sir. I could track it, so I dropped a charge on it." "You dropped a charge. You're a cook. You're not trained for depth charge deployment." "No, sir, but I watched the crews during drills. It looked straightforward." Morrison opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Did you just sink a U-boat by watching other people do it?" "I think so, sir. It exploded and broke the surface and sank." Morrison stared at James for a long moment. Then he started laughing. "You magnificent idiot. You just did what trained depth charge crews practice for months, by yourself, using cooking skills." "I don't understand, sir." "Following procedures, timing, measuring. That's all cooking is, right? And apparently that's all depth charge deployment is, too." Morrison shook his head in disbelief. "Get back to your galley, Mackenzie. Men will need breakfast. We'll talk about this later." James hurried below, his hands shaking. He'd just killed men, Germans, yes. Enemy submariners trying to sink American ships. But still, men, young men probably. Not much older than himself. They'd drowned in a steel tube at the bottom of the Atlantic because a cook had dropped a depth charge on them. He expected to feel guilty. Instead, he felt nothing. No triumph, no remorse. Just numbness and the knowledge that breakfast needed to be ready in 90 minutes. The Buckley sonar confirmed the kill at 0500 hours. Debris continued surfacing throughout the morning watch. Oil, life vests, and pieces of the submarine's pressure hull. German U-boat U-536 was officially credited as sunk, though the destroyer escorts crew had no idea which boat they'd destroyed. At 0800 hours, Commander Abel summoned James to his cabin. The commanding officer sat behind his small desk, studying a piece of paper. He looked up when James entered. "Seaman Mackenzie, you're the cook who sank a U-boat last night." "Yes, sir." "Using depth charges, you're not trained to operate." "Yes, sir." "After being told to stay in your galley." "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir." Abel set down the paper. "Do you understand you could be court-martialed for what you did? Unauthorized use of weapons, leaving your battle station, multiple violations of regulations." James's stomach dropped. He'd sunk an enemy submarine and was going to be punished for it. The Navy's logic was incomprehensible. "However," Abel continued, "you also saved American lives by destroying a submarine that would certainly have sunk merchant ships. So instead of court-martial, I'm writing you up for a commendation and assigning you as auxiliary depth charge operator during general quarters. Congratulations, Cook Mackenzie. You've proven yourself useful for something besides food." James didn't know what to say. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet." If you screw up again, I'll throw the book at you. Dismissed. James returned to the galley to find Chief Kowalski sitting at the prep table, looking pale but functional. The flu had broken during the night. "Heard you sank a U-boat, Mackenzie." "Yes, Chief. While you were supposed to be cooking breakfast." "The galley was secured, Chief. I had time before—" Kowalski held up a hand. "I don't care. You did good, real good. Maybe you're not just a cook after all." And it was the closest thing to praise James had ever received from Kowalski. He accepted it quietly and went back to work. The rest of May 17th passed without incident. The convoy continued eastward. James cooked meals, cleaned the galley, and tried to process what had happened. He'd killed men, saved lives, been threatened with court-martial, and commended simultaneously. The contradictions made his head hurt. That night, Henderson stopped by the galley. "Hey, Cookie, heard about your submarine kill. Pretty impressive." "Just got lucky," James said. "Lucky nothing. You saw something the officers missed and did something about it. That takes guts." Henderson paused. "I'm sorry we gave you grief about being a cook. You proved today that job doesn't matter. Character does." James appreciated that more than he could express. "Thanks, Henderson. You keep feeding us this good, you'll be the most popular man on the ship. Well, second most popular after you kill U-boats." May 18th brought fog, thick, impenetrable Atlantic fog that reduced visibility to less than 50 yards. The convoy slowed to prevent collisions between merchant ships. The destroyer escorts prowled blindly, their sonars searching for submarines they couldn't see. James was preparing lunch when general quarters sounded again. He secured the galley and headed to his new battle station, the aft depth charge racks. Lieutenant Morrison met him there. "We've got multiple sonar contacts, Mackenzie. At least 3 U-boats shadowing the convoy, waiting for nightfall to attack. If they surface in this fog, we'll never see them in time. Keep your eyes open." "Yes, sir." The next 4 hours were tense. The Buckley patrolled slowly, searching. Sonar reported contacts that appeared and disappeared. Depth charges were dropped on suspected positions. Nothing conclusive. Then, at 1500 hours, James saw it again, an oil slick, this one much larger, spreading across the water off the port side. Not a leak. A discharge. U-boats often discharged oil to confuse sonar or simulate destruction. But this discharge was too big, too obvious. It was either a trap or a desperate submarine trying to create a smokescreen. James reported it immediately. This time, the bridge listened. The Buckley turned toward the oil slick. The forward gun crew stood ready. Everyone waited. A conning tower broke the surface 60 yards off the port bow. The U-boat surfaced in the worst possible position, directly in front of a destroyer escort at close range. Probably a navigation error in the fog. Probably fatal. The forward gun fired before the U-boat's crew could even clear the conning tower. The first shell punched through the submarine's pressure hull. The second shell detonated inside the boat, triggering a massive internal explosion. The U-boat broke in half and sank in less than 30 seconds. There were no survivors. James watched from the depth charge station, stunned by the violence and speed. One moment, a submarine. 30 seconds later, nothing but debris and oil. Men were dead. How many? 40, 50. He'd never know. "Good spotting, Mackenzie," Morrison called from the bridge. "That's 2. 2 U-boats in 24 hours. James had never even seen a submarine before yesterday. Now he'd helped sink 2. The situation felt surreal. The convoy pressed onward through the fog. Night fell with the Buckley still at general quarters. Sonar maintained multiple contacts. More submarines were out there, hunting in the darkness. At 2100 hours, James spotted another oil slick, smaller this time, moving parallel to the convoy. He reported it. The Buckley turned to investigate. This time the submarine didn't surface. It stayed deep, perhaps sensing danger. The Buckley's sonar got a solid contact at 300 yards. Depth charges were readied. "Mackenzie," Morrison called, "you've got the eye tonight. You see anything else?" James studied the water carefully. The oil slick was faint but visible, moving slightly faster than the convoy. He tried to think like a submarine commander. If he were down there trying to attack the convoy, where would he position himself? Ahead of the convoy. Wait for the merchant ships to come to you. Save battery power. Let your targets come into range. "Sir, I think it's heading to position ahead of the convoy, setting up an ambush." Morrison considered this. "Makes sense. Helm, increase speed. Take us ahead of the convoy route." The Buckley surged forward. The oil slick grew brighter as they closed the distance. At 100 yards, sonar confirmed a solid contact. The U-boat knew it had been detected and was trying to dive deeper. "Prepare depth charge pattern," Morrison ordered. "Full spread, varying depths." The depth charge crews worked frantically. 6 charges were rolled off the stern racks, set for different depths from 100 to 300 feet. The pattern would bracket the submarine's likely position. The explosions came in sequence, each one closer to the target. The 5th charge must have scored a direct hit because the ocean erupted with air bubbles and debris. A massive oil slick spread across the surface. The sonar contact disappeared. "Target destroyed," the sonar operator reported. "Breaking up sounds. It's going down." 3 U-boats in 1 day. James felt no triumph, just exhaustion and a growing awareness that he'd been part of killing perhaps 150 German sailors. Young men with families, men who'd joined their navy for the same reasons James had joined his. But they'd been trying to sink merchant ships carrying food to Britain, trying to starve an entire nation into submission. The moral calculus of war was complicated, but ultimately it was them or us. James chose us. Make sure you're subscribed because the aftermath of this incredible day gets even more unbelievable. Hit that button now. The Buckley returned to its patrol station at 2200 hours. Commander Abel's voice came over the ship's intercom. "This is the captain. Today this ship sank 3 confirmed German submarines. That's 3 enemy boats that won't be sinking our merchants. Well done to everyone involved, particularly to Seaman Mackenzie, our cook, who spotted all 3 targets. Tonight's dinner is on the captain. Mackenzie, serve whatever you want. Price is no object." The crew cheered. James stood in the galley, overwhelmed. He'd gone from being mocked as just a cook to being praised by the captain in less than 24 hours. That night, James prepared the best meal he could manage with their limited supplies. Steak from the ship's freezer, properly seasoned and cooked to medium rare. Real mashed potatoes with butter, fresh baked rolls, apple pie for dessert using canned apples, and creativity. The crew devoured it. Henderson came back for seconds on everything. Even Chief Kowalski admitted it was the best meal he'd eaten in the Navy. After dinner service ended, James sat alone in the galley processing everything that had happened. 3 submarines, perhaps 150 men, dead, because a 19-year-old cook from Nebraska had spotted oil slicks and understood hunting patterns. Lieutenant Morrison found him there. "You okay, Mackenzie?" "I killed a lot of people today, sir." Morrison sat down across from him. "You did. And you saved a lot of people, too. Those U-boats would have sunk merchant ships. Each merchant ship carries 50 to 60 crew, plus cargo that England desperately needs. You do the math." James had already done the math. 3 submarines versus potentially a dozen merchant ships. 150 German sailors versus 600 Allied sailors, plus countless British civilians who'd starve without food shipments. The numbers favored his actions, but numbers didn't change the fact that he'd killed men. "It gets easier," Morrison said. "Not easy, but easier. You'll learn to live with it. The alternative is letting them win, and we can't allow that." The convoy reached Liverpool on May 22nd without losing a single merchant ship. This was noteworthy. Most Atlantic convoys lost 5 to 10% of their ships to U-boat attacks. Convoy HX-237 arrived completely intact, largely because 3 submarines that should have attacked it were resting on the Atlantic floor. The Buckley received orders to remain in Liverpool for resupply and minor repairs. Shore leave was granted. James explored the city, shocked by the bomb damage from German air raids. Entire neighborhoods were rubble. The British people moved through the destruction with stoic determination, queuing patiently for rationed food. An old woman at a market stall recognized his American uniform. "Navy, dear?" "Yes, ma'am. Off the destroyer Escort in the harbor." "You boys keep the food coming, you hear? We can take the bombing, but we can't fight if we're starving. You tell your captain thank you from all of us." James promised he would. The woman's gratitude made him understand the larger picture. He wasn't just a cook or even a submarine killer. He was part of a vast system keeping Britain alive and fighting. Every merchant ship that arrived meant Britain survived another week. Back aboard the Buckley, James found a stack of letters waiting for him. His mother had written 3 times, his sisters twice. Even his father, who rarely wrote anyone, had sent a brief note. His mother's letters alternated between worry and pride. She'd heard about his submarine kills through the Navy's notification system. The local newspaper in Omaha had run a story. "Local boy sinks 3 German subs." His picture from boot camp accompanied the article. His sisters wanted details about combat. His father's note was characteristically brief. "Proud of you. Do your duty. Come home safe." James wrote back, trying to explain what had happened without revealing operational details that censors would black out anyway. He told them about the oil slicks, the explosions, the feeling of contributing to something larger than himself. He didn't mention the nightmares that had started, dreams of drowning in a steel tube while water rushed in through torn hull plating. He woke gasping, convinced he was the one in the submarine rather than the one who'd sunk it. The Buckley departed Liverpool on May 28th for the return crossing. This convoy was smaller, just 40 merchant ships in ballast, returning to America for more cargo. The destroyer escort screen was also smaller, just 4 ships instead of 6. The crossing was quieter. German submarines had apparently shifted to other hunting grounds after the heavy losses in mid-May. The Buckley made sonar contacts twice, but never achieved anything conclusive. James settled back into galley routine. Chief Kowalski, fully recovered, reassumed command of the kitchen, but the relationship had changed. Kowalski treated James as an equal now, not a subordinate. They worked together efficiently, producing meals that the crew actually enjoyed. Henderson started a rumor that James had magical powers, able to see submarines that others couldn't. The nickname stuck, Magic Mackenzie. James tolerated it with good humor. Better to be called Magic Mackenzie than Cookie. The convoy reached New York on June 7th. The Buckley immediately began preparations for its next crossing. The Battle of the Atlantic was far from over. German submarines continued sinking merchant ships. The convoy system needed every available escort. James received a summons to Commander Abel's cabin on June 8th. He reported nervously, unsure what the captain wanted. "At ease, Mackenzie," Abel said. "I've been reviewing your service record. You've been aboard 3 months. You've sunk 3 U-boats. You've maintained excellent performance in your primary duty as cook. The crew respects you. Your officers praise your initiative." James waited for the other shoe to drop. "I'm promoting you to Petty Officer 3rd Class, effective immediately," Abel continued. "Your primary duty remains ship's cook, but during general quarters, you'll serve as auxiliary lookout and depth charge operator. Any questions?" "No, sir." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. You earned it. Most sailors serve entire careers without sinking a single enemy vessel. You got 3 in 1 day. That's worthy of recognition." The promotion came with a pay raise and a new rating badge. More significantly, it came with respect. Petty officers were considered the backbone of the Navy. James was no longer just a kid cook. He was a professional sailor. The next convoy departed June 15th. This crossing was routine until June 21st, when sonar detected a submarine near the convoy's rear. The Buckley raced to investigate. James stood at his battle station, searching the water. This time he saw nothing. No oil slick, no surface contact, no indication of where the submarine might be. His magic had apparently run out. The Buckley dropped a standard depth charge pattern based on sonar contacts. Multiple explosions bracketed the estimated position. No debris surfaced. The submarine, if it had been there at all, escaped. "Don't worry about it," Morrison told James afterward. "You can't hit them all. You've done more than most sailors accomplish in years." But James felt the failure keenly. Men were counting on his ability to spot submarines. When he couldn't deliver, he felt like he'd let everyone down. The convoy reached Liverpool without incident. 2 weeks of shore leave were granted for crew rest and ship maintenance. James explored more of Britain, traveling to London on a weekend pass. The capital showed even heavier bomb damage than Liverpool. Yet life continued. Pubs were full, theaters operated, people went about their business with the attitude that Hitler could drop all the bombs he wanted. Britain wouldn't surrender. James met a girl named Elizabeth at a USO dance. She worked in a munitions factory, assembling artillery shells for 12 hours daily. They danced, talked, and shared stories about life in wartime. She asked about his submarine kills. He deflected, not wanting to discuss it. "You're a hero," Elizabeth insisted. "Those submarines kill our people. You're protecting us." "I'm just doing my job," James replied. "Your job is cooking. Sinking submarines is above and beyond. That makes you a hero, whether you want to be one or not." They exchanged addresses. Elizabeth promised to write. James promised to visit if the Buckley returned to Liverpool. Both knew they'd probably never see each other again. Wartime romances were built on brief moments and long odds. The Buckley returned to sea on July 20th. The next 4 months brought 6 more Atlantic crossings. James participated in 4 submarine attacks, but none were confirmed kills. The U-boats had learned caution. They stayed deeper, moved more carefully, avoided surface operations during daylight. The war was shifting. American shipyards were producing merchant vessels faster than U-boats could sink them. Destroyer escorts flooded the Atlantic, making submarine operations increasingly dangerous. The convoy system was winning. James continued cooking, continued standing watches, continued contributing to the grinding attrition that was slowly strangling Germany's submarine force. No more spectacular single-day victories, just steady, professional naval service. On November 17, 1943, exactly 6 months after his 3 submarine kills, James received orders for transfer. The Buckley was heading to the Pacific for anti-submarine operations against Japan. Most of the crew would go with her, but James had been selected for a different assignment. He was being transferred to the Navy's training command to teach submarine recognition and anti-submarine tactics. His success on May 17th had made him valuable as an instructor. The Navy wanted to share his skills with new destroyer escort crews. Commander Abel called him in for a final meeting. "Mackenzie, you've been an asset to this ship. You made us better. The crew will miss you." "I'll miss them too, sir." "Your instincts and ability to read the ocean saved lives. The Navy recognizes that. Teaching others what you know will save even more lives. This is important duty." James reported to the Submarine Warfare Training Center in Miami, Florida, on December 1, 1943. The assignment felt strange. He was 20 years old and teaching experienced officers how to hunt submarines. Many of his students were older and more experienced than he was, but his record spoke for itself. 3 confirmed U-boat kills in 1 day. Nobody else in the Navy could make that claim. When he explained how he'd tracked submarines using oil slicks and intuition developed from hunting back in Nebraska, officers listened. "Hunting submarines is like hunting any predator," James told one class. "You have to think like them. Where would you position yourself for an ambush? How would you approach your target? What would make you nervous enough to surface or discharge oil?" The techniques he taught were simple but effective. Watch for oil slicks, notice unusual water disturbances, understand submarine limitations and tactics. Think like a hunter, not just a target. James taught at the training center for the rest of the war. He never returned to see combat duty. But the destroyer escort crews he trained sank dozens of German and Japanese submarines using the methods he taught them. His contribution to the war effort multiplied far beyond his personal 3 kills. The war in Europe ended May 8, 1945. The war with Japan ended August 15th. James Robert Mackenzie left active duty on October 3, 1945, exactly 3 years after enlisting. He returned to Omaha a decorated veteran. 3 confirmed submarine kills, Bronze Star for heroic achievement, multiple commendations. He was 22 years old. The local newspaper wanted interviews. James declined. He'd done his duty. That was enough. He used the GI Bill to attend culinary school in Chicago, earning a degree in professional cooking. The Navy had taught him that feeding people well was valuable work. He embraced it fully. By 1950, James owned a small restaurant in Omaha. Mackenzie's Steakhouse served quality food at fair prices. Word spread. The business grew. He opened a second location, then a third. Veterans ate free on holidays. James never advertised it, but word got around. Every Veterans Day and Memorial Day, his restaurants filled with men who'd served. James cooked personally on those days, working the grill like he'd worked the Buckley's galley. He married in 1952. His wife Mary had lost her brother on a destroyer at Guadalcanal. They understood each other's connection to the war. They raised 3 children, all of whom heard stories about their father's service, though James downplayed his role. "I was just a cook who got lucky," he'd tell them. "Real heroes are the men who didn't come home." But his children knew better. They'd seen the medals in the drawer. They'd heard their father's crewmates visit and tell stories. They understood that their father's modesty was itself a form of heroism. He'd done extraordinary things and then returned to ordinary life without seeking recognition. In 1968, the Navy commissioned a new destroyer escort, the USS Mackenzie, named in James's honor. He attended the commissioning ceremony in Charleston, South Carolina, moved beyond words that a ship would bear his name. "I don't deserve this," he told the admiral presiding over the ceremony. "The Navy disagrees," the admiral replied. "You changed anti-submarine warfare tactics. You taught hundreds of officers. You saved countless lives. The Mackenzie will carry your legacy into the future." James Robert Mackenzie died on March 4, 1998, at age 75. His obituary ran in newspapers across the country. The headline in the Omaha World Herald read, "Hero Cook Dies, Saved Convoy, Sank 3 Subs in 1 Day." His funeral drew veterans from across the country. Men from the Buckley, gray-haired and walking with canes, came to pay respects. Students he'd taught at the submarine warfare school attended. The crew of the USS Mackenzie sent a delegation. Henderson, now 82, delivered the eulogy. James Mackenzie was the best cook the Navy ever had. But more than that, he was the bravest man I knew. They mocked him for being a cook. He proved them wrong by saving lives while making sure we ate well. He never sought glory. He just did his duty better than anyone expected. That's the definition of a hero. The story of James Robert Mackenzie contains multiple lessons that transcend naval warfare. First, never judge people by their job titles. Henderson and others had dismissed James as just a cook. They learned that job descriptions don't determine worth. Character does. Second, skills transfer in unexpected ways. James's ability to track submarines came from hunting in Nebraska. His precise depth charge deployment came from cooking skills. His understanding of timing and patterns translated perfectly from kitchen to combat. Third, doing your job well matters regardless of recognition. James never sought to be a hero. He wanted to cook good food and contribute to the war effort. By excelling at both, He achieved more than glory seekers who pursued recognition above excellence. The Navy's official history of anti-submarine warfare devotes 2 pages to James Mackenzie's actions on May 17, 1943. The analysis concludes that his 3 submarine kills prevented approximately 12 merchant ship sinkings. At an average of 60 crew per merchant, James's actions saved roughly 720 Allied sailors. The math extends further. The cargo those 12 ships would have carried represented food for approximately 150,000 British civilians for a month. In a nation facing starvation, those supplies made the difference between survival and surrender. One 19-year-old cook, mocked by his shipmates, armed with skills learned in his mother's kitchen and hunting in Nebraska grasslands, changed the course of a battle that helped determine the war's outcome. The 3 submarines James helped sink were identified post-war through German naval records. U-536, commissioned January 1943, sunk on her second patrol with all 48 crew lost. U-289, commissioned August 1942, sunk on her fourth patrol with 51 crew lost. U-417, commissioned October 1942, sunk on her third patrol with 49 crew lost. 148 German sailors died in those submarines, young men, mostly in their 20s, who joined the Kriegsmarine believing they were defending their homeland. They became casualties in a war their government started, dying in steel coffins at the bottom of the Atlantic. James never forgot that fact. He'd killed those men, necessary killing in a just war, but killing nonetheless. The nightmares that started after May 17th never completely stopped. He'd wake occasionally, decades after the war, gasping and convinced he was drowning. His wife Mary would hold him, saying nothing, understanding that some wounds never fully heal. The cost of victory included carrying those memories forever. But James also never forgot the 720 Allied sailors whose lives he saved, or the British civilians who ate because convoy HX-237 arrived intact, or the destroyer escort crews he trained who went on to sink more submarines using his methods. The balance sheet of James Robert Mackenzie's war showed profit in lives saved versus lives taken. Not everyone who serves can say the same. Today, in the Naval Heritage Museum in Washington, D.C., a small exhibit tells James's story. A photo shows him at 19, wearing his cook's apron and holding a soup ladle. Another photo shows him at his depth charge station, scanning the ocean. A third shows him teaching at the training center. The placard reads, Seaman James Robert Mackenzie, cook aboard USS Buckley, sank 3 German submarines in one day using unconventional tactics and exceptional observation skills. His methods were adopted Navy-wide, contributing significantly to Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic. A reminder that heroes come from unexpected places and that every job in service matters. Visitors often pause at the exhibit, struck by the juxtaposition. A cook, 3 submarines, one day. It seems impossible. But the documentation is thorough. The German naval records confirm it. The Buckley's deck logs record it. The crew's testimony validates it. James Robert Mackenzie did something that seemed impossible. Not because he was a trained warrior or weapons expert. Because he paid attention, thought creatively, and acted when action was needed. They mocked a 19-year-old cook, dismissed him as irrelevant to the real fighting, treated him as support staff rather than a warrior. Then he sank 3 German U-boats in one day and proved that, in war, everyone who serves matters. Every job is important. Every person can contribute. The farm boy who'd been rejected as 4F and settled for cooking instead of combat ended up achieving more in one day than most combat sailors accomplish in entire careers, not through training or tactics taught in manuals, but through instinct, improvisation, and the courage to act when others hesitated. That's the story of James Robert Mackenzie, mocked as a cook, remembered as a hero. The 19-year-old who sank 3 German submarines and taught the Navy that battles are won by people who do their jobs exceptionally well, regardless of what those jobs are. In the cold mathematics of war, his contribution was clear. 3 enemy submarines destroyed, 720 Allied lives saved, countless others protected by crews he'd trained. The numbers justified every commendation he received. But James himself never focused on numbers. When asked about his service in later years, he'd redirect the conversation to his shipmates, the men who manned guns, operated sonar, maintained engines, and did 1,000 other jobs that kept the Buckley fighting. I just spotted the submarines, he'd say. Everyone else did the real work. It was characteristic modesty from a man who had done extraordinary things and then spent the rest of his life pretending they were ordinary. The cook who became a hero while insisting he was still just a cook. That, perhaps, is the most important lesson of James Robert Mackenzie's story. True heroes don't seek recognition. They do what needs doing, contribute what they can contribute, and then go back to their regular lives without fanfare. They mock 19-year-old cooks until those cooks sink 3 submarines and save hundreds of lives. Then they learn that heroism isn't about your job description. It's about your character, your courage, and your willingness to act when the moment demands it. James Robert Mackenzie proved that on May 17, 1943, the Navy, his shipmates, and history never forgot.